it's Stuart here from Ragnarok Survival. What I'm going to talk about today is communications, and in particular, alternative communications. So, for most people, what we're going to be using to communicate with each other over long distances, apart from our voice, is phone calls or SMSs through our phone. Most people will be familiar with using alternative communications through our phones or through our other devices in things like internet-based systems like WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, and I shouldn't need to harp on about those too much. You should know what they're all about nowadays. And obviously there's different levels of encryption and security that we can get within those apps. So just for example, I use all three of those. WhatsApp I do not trust at all, and so I will not send any sensitive information through those. I would probably prefer to use something like Telegram if I was going to do that, or find another means altogether. What else can we use above and beyond that though? So what we need to think here in the scenario is, what if the cell network goes down? Which can happen quite easily. Cell networks can go down for quite a number of reasons. It might be the local cell tower is destroyed, like a natural disaster from fires or storms or something like that. We can actually clog cell towers ourselves if too many people are trying to send too much information through a cell tower. We saw things like this actually happen in a lot of the riots and demonstrations that have been happening in the US in the last couple of years, where people were sending a whole heap of videos and pictures and things like that, and it actually clogged up the cell network and shut everything down. So communications was not so great in those areas. On top of that, obviously we can have the internet actually cut off. And we've seen a couple of examples of this happen within the last week. So that Tongan volcano that went off actually severed the internet cable to Tonga. So for almost 3 days, we had absolutely no idea what was going on in that country. We're becoming increasingly reliant on internet now, so when that goes down, then we're left with very few backups. So the purpose of this video is to start thinking about some of those other backups. What can we do outside of cell networks and internet in order to communicate with each other? So the first one I'm going to talk about is satellite communication. So we've got a few different options here. We can actually connect to the internet through satellites. We've got things like Starlink now that normal civilians can access. There is a bit of a fee for buying this equipment and subscription fee anytime we're using anything to do with satellites. But we can use that. We've got sat phones that we can use, and then we've got other devices like GPS emergency beacons plus satellite SMS. So this is the Garmin InReach, and I use this when I'm going out into the wilderness, especially if I'm guiding other people and I want that extra layer of security, knowing that I can access communications and emergency services through that means there. The next thing I want to talk about is ham radio. So this here is a Baofeng UV5R. And essentially, that's a UHF and a VHF radio, but this is essentially a ham radio. Now with ham radio, we can get bigger, better sets, we can get large aerials and our antennas, but we need to think about the legalities of actually using ham radio. So you do need to go and do a ham radio test and get registered as a ham radio user, which means you get your own channel. Anybody who wants to really secure your communications over a long distance, i.e., hundreds of kilometers even around the world potentially, then that's what I would recommend you actually look into doing. More shorter range communications with each other, we've got things like UHF radios. So this one here is a Uniden 5-watt radio. GME also make them in Australia. There are a couple of good brands that I recommend. Good for close range communications. Some of them will advertise that they go out to 40 kilometers, but in my working experience, you'd have to be very lucky to get it out to that sort of distance. In reality, I sort of plan around this working at about 2 to 5 Ks, maybe out to 10 Ks, but usually not much more beyond that. You do need to think about the power that these actual units use. So 5-watt is the highest legal power UHF radio or walkie-talkie that we can get within Australia. And from there they go down. So 2-watt, 1-watt, even half-watt little walkie-talkies. The less wattage, the less power, the less distance that signal is actually going to send. A few other things to think about that are a little bit outside the box. So we need to start thinking about how do we actually signal each other without any sort of radio communications, and maybe in a shorter distance as well. So good old flashlights, we can use that, especially at night, to signal each other over longer distances. Marker panel. So different colored marker panels that we can use, just something that contrasts against, say, a natural setting, especially if you're out in the wilderness or anything. Marker panels or large orange or brightly colored material can be used to attract attention. And then things like mirrors. So this is a signal mirror. Got it when I was in the army. And these can be used obviously for a number of reasons, but we can use that to signal people over long distances at day because we can reflect light. And I've got a piece of string attached to this one, so I can actually swing that around my head and it will obviously show quite an attractive signal over a large distance. So these are just some of the thoughts, you can start to think about what can I use to communicate with people. Remember, when we're building our PACE plan, the primary, alternative, contingency, and emergency, we could probably slot a lot of these in there. So primary would be our communications through our phone, alternate might be our satellite communications or our UHF, the contingency might be the other one, and then emergency communications, we might be thinking about marker panel or our mirrors. So there's just a few down and dirty layman sort of ideas for communications. If you've got anything else that you'd like to add, feel free to chuck it in the comments. But until next time, guys, stay safe out there.